Could Russia launch another offensive in Kharkiv Oblast? Will Ukraine finally be allowed to strike targets on Russian soil using Western weapons? And is Russia facing issues with military recruitment? This is week 118 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Anna Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top 3 stories from Ukraine from this week. Just a few weeks after Russia launched a new ground offensive in Kharkiv Oblast, which has quickly lost momentum, Ukrainian officials warned that Moscow wasn't planning to give up on its goals in the northeast of Ukraine just yet. The current push into Kharkiv Oblast has been stopped about 10 kilometers into Ukraine, with fighting ongoing in several areas. Soon after, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russia was gathering another grouping of forces about 90 kilometers northwest of Kharkiv. Whether the Russian troops are preparing to reinforce the current offensive or open a new front remains to be seen, although top military officials say that the number of Russian troops currently gathered at the border is not enough for a breakthrough. Military analysts believe that the primary goal of the Kharkiv offensive, or potentially offensives, is not to make a serious bid for Kharkiv's territory, but rather to pull Ukraine's manpower, resources, and attention away from other parts of the front in the east and the south. Intense fighting is ongoing in eastern Ukraine, in particular in Donetsk Oblast, which Russia has been attempting to fully occupy since the start of the full-scale invasion. The Kharkiv offensive could well be a strategic operation to spread Ukraine's forces thin, allowing Russia to take more territory. This week also saw notable changes in policy regarding Ukraine's ability to strike targets in Russia using Western-supplied weapons. Until now, Ukraine has been forbidden from using Western weapons to strike military installations within the Russian Federation or to attack Russian troops before they cross the border. Most recently, this has allowed Russian troops to amass on the Kharkiv border relatively unimpeded. The presidential office confirmed on May 31st that Ukraine can now use American weapons to deflect Russian missiles that are headed towards Kharkiv Oblast, to attack troops that have gathered on the Russia-Kharkiv border, and to shoot down aircraft that are launching bombs at Ukraine. While this is a huge step forward in staving off another offensive, Politico's unnamed sources in the US government clarified that Ukraine still cannot use American weapons to conduct deep strikes within Russian territory. This change in heart by Washington has been mirrored by other NATO allies. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who has long been adamant that Ukraine must not use German weapons on Russian territory, fearing escalation, announced on May 31st that he will lift the ban and allow Ukraine to strike Russian military targets with German weapons. 2 days prior, on May 29th, Finland, Canada, and Poland issued separate statements saying that Ukraine can use their weapons to strike targets in Russian territory. On May 30th, Denmark announced that Ukraine could use Danish-supplied F-16 fighter jets for the same purpose when they arrive later in the summer. Every morning, the Kyiv Independent publishes an updated list of Russian losses, which accounts for the casualties and destroyed equipment from the previous day. We get these figures from the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces, and it's common to see more than 1,000 Russian casualties per day, every month. 2 weeks ago, on May 12th, Russia lost a record 1,740 soldiers in a single day. And this week, it was announced that in the 27 months since the start of the full-scale invasion, more than 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or injured. This number is corroborated by estimates from Western European nations. France estimates that of that 500,000, about 150,000 are fatalities, with the rest made up of some combination of wounded, missing, and captured soldiers. If 150,000 Russian soldiers have indeed been killed, that amounts to roughly 10 times the number of Soviet soldiers who were killed in the decade-long conflict with Afghanistan in the 80s. This means that Russia is losing troops at one of the highest rates compared to other nations in previous wars. For reference, Britain suffered 750,000 casualties during the 6 years of World War II. Russia is currently losing troops at nearly double that rate per year. In all the wars that the United States has fought since 1945, about 102,000 American soldiers have been killed in total. In comparison, 58,000 troops were killed in the entirety of the Vietnam War, barely more than a third of how many Russians have been killed in Ukraine in the past 2 years. And yet, despite this huge loss of human life, Russia's military recruitment is doing fine. The country's defense ministry claims that over 100,000 men signed military contracts in the first 3 months of 2024, averaging about 1,000 new recruits per day. If we take a look at this graphic again, an average of 1,000 Russians are killed or injured in Ukraine every day, while simultaneously, the same number of men are presenting themselves at recruitment centers. John Foreman, a former British defense attaché to Moscow, also speculated that although the huge casualty rate will eventually lead to a demographic crisis for Russia, the government isn't worried about that. In Foreman's words, Putin is mortgaging his entire country's future for his war in Ukraine. That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more stories from Ukraine. Your support is what makes our work possible. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. If you'd like to become a member of the Kyiv Independent community, please visit the link in the description below. I'll see you next week.